We're really appreciative of the opportunity and for YouthREX hosting us today. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us, taking time out of your day to learn about the DARE study and how to support and affirm 2S LGBTQ young people who have experiences of detransition, retransition, and gender fluidity, which we're going to learn a little bit more about today. So I'm Kinnan. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at York University here. I'm also principal investigator of the DARE study. And we're going to start off with just a few introductions and kind of how we orient and connect to this work. And then we'll get into to sharing some of the content. So I'm not sure who wants to start us off, Ari, Mac, or Maddie. Go
Yeah,
for it.
yeah, I don't mind going. Yeah, hi. My name is Ari. I am a PhD student at York in the education faculty, and I'm a research assistant on this project. And I came to this work mainly looking at kind of the experiences of my own queer and trans community. I'm also queer and non-binary, and I've had quite a few people in my life either pause their transition or detransition or later retransition. And I think what I've noticed from their experiences is that they've had really complicated relationships with other queer and trans people as a result of those experiences. That's kind of what brought me to kind of know more about what detransition is and brought me to this work.
Hi, I'm Mac. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a queer cisgender woman. I'm also a research assistant on this project, and I'm a student. I'm doing my master's in social work at York University. My research interests really focus on how people navigate and make meaning out of really complex and sometimes really challenging health and social care systems, which can be sites of healing and also can be sites of harm. I came into this work because I believe that detransition is an important and understudied and underexamined experience that deserves thoughtful, non-stigmatizing attention. I also have trans loved ones, and I'm an ally to trans communities, and I hold that alongside a really deep commitment to listening to detransitioners on their own terms. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I joined the DARE team as a volunteer last January, and I later joined as a research assistant. I personally transitioned when I was 15 and lived as a transgender man and identified as a transgender man for many years until I detransitioned when I was in my early 20s. So I've come to this research through my own lived experience of detransition and transition regret.
Thanks so much for sharing, Ari, Mac, and Maddie. So a little bit more about me and my connection to the work. As mentioned, so my name's Kinnan. I also use any pronouns. And as a queer, trans masculine social scientist, I've been involved in LGBTQ plus community for about 20 years or more. And I've always been interested in what's happening in the margins of community. What are some of the downstream consequences of dominant ideas and the stories that don't always get told? The focus of my PhD research was gender affirming healthcare delivery in Canada. That's what got me kind of interested in examining detransition. And to be honest, after the PhD, I was planning to turn my attention to another LGBTQ related research topic rather than trans health. Um, but about 5, 6 years ago, I started to hear about experiences of detransition. And then a few of my own friends from community started detransitioning, people who I had met back in 2009, 2010, when I was starting my own gender transition back in the day. And so looking at the academic literature and then looking at community as well, I felt that this was an experience that needed to be better understood. And once I started doing this research and word kind of got around, I then started receiving a lot of emails from people who were looking for support, care, people who were starting their own detransition and didn't know where to turn, or from clinicians and care providers who had patients who they didn't feel they had the adequate tools to care for them. And so that was kind of how some of this work was born. And we're really happy to today share some of this work with all of you. One brief nod to our study funders and the rest of the research team. So the study is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And we have a really a large, broad team who are from social work, public health, psychology, psychiatry, and a large majority of our research team are members of the trans and gender diverse community.
Yeah, so just to start, there are four kind of grounding principles that we wanted to mention that we're kind of approaching this work with. So I'll just read them out here. So gender identity and expression and sexuality can be fluid and expansive, particularly for 2SLGBTQ plus youth and young adults. Some people who transition eventually detransition, and some of those individuals may later retransition. A large majority of people who detransition are 2S LGBTQ+, and community-led research and care for detransition and retransition is vital. So we also wanted to share this quote with you. I'll read it first before I kind of explain why we've included it in here. So do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And this is something that we included because it's something we're trying to keep in mind as researchers that are studying detransition and often researching trans and gender diverse people. There's very little research that has been done on the experiences of detransitioners and retransitioners, and they also make up a very small community of people. And earlier studies of detransition was often very limited, while more current studies have offered a bit more awareness and context to those experiences. And we've learned, obviously, from the researchers before us about this work and about these experiences. And we're aware of the ways in which studying detransition and retransition care needs will ultimately result in better gender affirming healthcare for everyone. So we just wanted to share this quote with you as we get started.
So detransition is a misunderstood experience and phenomenon due to dominant ideas about what it means for people to be transgender. For instance, the idea that trans identities are inherently innate, or the idea that every trans person is born this way, born in the wrong body. Debates surrounding gender-affirming healthcare have amplified this stigma towards people who detransition, and public dialogue minimizes the reality that identity changes and regret can occur after transitioning. And stigma is something that many participants in the DARE study mentioned. So here we have participant 65 saying, with detransition, definitely please stop the stigma. Don't be scared of us. And loss of community is another thing that's come up quite often among participants in the DARE study. Many participants felt isolated through their detransition, finding themselves without formal supports from the gender-affirming care system or from LGBTQ plus organizations. Some people expressed that the only care options they felt were available were peer support with others who had had similar experiences. Participant 3 shared her perspective on the lack of structured community support, saying, I think a lot of people do sort of self-isolate and lose a lot of community and potential care we could provide for each other instead of, going online to these very emotionally intense detransition spaces. So here are two questions to think about. What is detransition and gender fluidity, and how does it relate to gender affirming healthcare? And Mac is going to talk a little bit about those questions and their answers.
I'm so sorry about that. Okay, hi. So the first thing that I wanted to mention was that lots of trans and non-binary people take hormones and sometimes they decide to stop. Some people may conceptualize this as a detransition and others might not. There are a number of different reasons why someone might decide to stop taking hormones. So that could look like health concerns or side effects. being really satisfied with the effects of hormones or dissatisfied or needing to stop hormones in order to get surgery. International research estimates that between 2 and 30% of people discontinue hormones, but other research conducted in Canada and the US has estimated between 16 and 30%. So these stats are more applicable to North America. Overall, it's not an uncommon experience. So detransition doesn't have a consistent definition or a measuring tool at this point, which does really contribute to detrans erasure. Detransition differs from just discontinuing hormones. So it means a change in identity, which prompted stopping or reversing a transition. That being said, detransition experiences are diverse and varied and largely are 2SLGBTQ+ experiences. Gender identity is often very fluid, especially among younger people. Research has found that between 8 and 79% of gender diverse youth and young adults report gender identity changes over time. So again, really not an uncommon experience. So again, detransition means a change in identity leading to stopping or reversing transition. So this can look like a change in how they conceptualize their sex, their gender, or their sexuality. Some pathways that we do tend to see are people who identified as trans men shifting into a gender nonconforming lesbian identity, or people who identified as trans women shifting into a non-binary identity or identifying as a gay or bisexual man. Not everyone who detransitions experiences decisional regret, but some people certainly do, between 33 and 60%. Regret and detransition actually hasn't been studied in Canada since 1989 until our research team, which makes estimating prevalence really difficult. Clinical studies of detransition have found rates to be between 1 and 9.8%, which is a very big range, but more recent estimates find that it's between 5 and 10%. And some reasons for detransition. So why do people choose to detransition? So we have some community-based studies here looking at factors and reasons for detransition. So people who are assigned female at birth tend to endorse more internally motivated identity-related factors, whereas people who are assigned male at birth tend to endorse more external factors. So internally motivated factors can look like coming to the conclusion that their gender dysphoria was related to something else that was going on for them, like a history of trauma or neurodiversity or physical health concerns or a desire to express gender in a different way. External factors might look like discrimination or lack of acceptance or social pressure. And one study's found that being assigned male at birth or having a bisexual orientation is associated with detransition. So detransition, retransition, gender fluidity are experiences that are likelier to occur 4 to 8.5 years after beginning a gender transition. So that's part of the reason why we're beginning to see these experiences more in our society, because of the numbers of people transitioning has increased over the past 5 to 10 years, especially among people who are assigned female at birth or transmasculine people.
Hey, thanks for that great lit review, Mac. So I'm going to turn now and talk a little bit about the DARE study, its objectives and methodology. So first, the DARE study really seeks to complement and add to some of the literature that Mac was just speaking about, and specifically in the Canadian and American context. So the DARE study, as I mentioned, it's very community driven, and its objective first is to explore pathways to detransition, such as the reasons why people felt the need to detransition or retransition. And then a second objective is to understand people's experiences within care systems and ongoing detransition related care needs as people go through, in some cases, a second or a third transition. So in terms of study design and methodology, it's a binational mixed method study. So we started off with survey, a long survey that was available online, and then we conducted follow-up interviews with select people who took the survey. We did 42 interviews. To be eligible to take the survey, participants had to be age 16 and older, living in Canada or the United States, and they had to self-report having an experience of ever stopping or reversing a gender transition for any reason, or had a desire for detransition but feeling unable to take any steps. Because as mentioned, detransition can be a stigmatized experience. And so some people have experienced a change in their identity, maybe have a desire to express themselves differently, but it's challenging to do that for some people. And we made the survey available in English, French, and Spanish to make it inclusive to multiple sociolinguistic groups. And then to promote the survey, we shared study flyers around 1,800 plus organizations and gender care providers were contacted. We also did paid advertising over social media, and we reached over 7.7 million accounts. So in the end, we included 957 eligible people who took the survey. But a quick note, we have a paper that's available that talks all about our protocol through which we identified and removed kind of bots, fraudulent responses, and so forth. So we retained about 69% of the final completed samples, just to make that, to mention that, just because online sampling is such a problem with bots at the moment. And then we did 42 follow-up one-on-one in-depth interviews with participants who completed the survey to get a little bit more information, more nuanced information about their survey responses and the course of their lives. And as mentioned, detransition and retransition are very heterogeneous experiences. So not everyone has a similar experience through detransition, and we wanted to be very inclusive of all the different kind of potential pathways that we might see in our study. And so we had these 3 different posters that were shared to tell people about the study, and they were available in the 3 different languages as well. So in terms of preliminary results, again, the analytic samples, 957 participants, and we were collecting survey data between December 1st, 2023 up until May 1st, 2024. So we're a little over a year past data collection. So in brief, just some general sociodemographics and neurodivergence in the sample. So a majority of the participants were youth and young adults with a mean age of 26. We had a very good age range between 16 and 74. But as you can see, the median age is 24, and then the mean is 26, and 76% of the sample is 29 and younger. So this is generally a younger population. In terms of assigned sex at birth, 79% were assigned female, almost 21% were assigned male. And in terms of reporting DSD diagnosis or intersex, 3.7% said yes, and then a further 6.7% said unsure. We also had a very nice geographic spread in terms of representation across Canada and the United States, with the exception of some of the northern regions. So the northern territories and Alaska had no representation, and there's a few states and provinces. But overall, we had representation from most of the regions. And interestingly, we had a very large representation from the province of Ontario with 109 participants. In terms of race and ethnicity, participants could select more than one category, and the sample is largely, it is fairly racially homogeneous, with 86% reporting being white and 23% reported being multiracial. And we did have representation from some different racial and ethnic groups, including 10% being Jewish, 8% being Indigenous, 7% being Latin American, 5% being Black, 3.7% East Asian, 2.7% Middle Eastern, 1.5% Southeast Asian, so forth. We also were interested in understanding how do people conceptualize themselves and what language are they comfortable with using after stopping or reversing their transition. So these questions asked about, do you consider yourself non-binary, transgender, or detransitioned? And so you can see about a third consider themselves to be non-binary, 44% consider themselves to be transgender, and I can't see the other one here, 41% consider themselves to be detransitioned. But I also wanted to just make note of the fairly substantial portion of people who reported being unsure, so between 10 and 18%. And that's not unusual when you start to talk to people who are experiencing detransition or identity fluidity. For some people may actually kind of reject labeling themselves or just feel unsure or even ambivalent about some of these labels after their detransition process. So we asked about sexual orientation identity, and again, participants could choose multiple options here. A large majority of the sample were plurisexual, meaning they were sexually attracted to or interested in more than one gender. So see a large portion are bisexual or pansexual or queer. And then you see some monosexual identities, including lesbian being a prevalent response there, as well as gay, straight or heterosexual. And then we also have some representation of asexual participants as well as two-spirit. And we also asked about, formal diagnoses received from a healthcare provider, as well as self-diagnosed or self-identified neurodiverse categories. We're just reporting on the formally diagnosed categories here. So you can see major depressive disorder is one of the most, and anxiety are both the most frequently reported, followed by ADHD, PTSD, autism, eating disorders, and so forth. So now going over some of the transition-related experiences that participants reported. So we were interested in, when did people start out on their transition journey, in the sense of when did they start to think of themselves as either non-binary, transgender, or transsexual? And so you can see that 2014, 2015 is really kind of a peak year here. But a large portion of the sample started to think of themselves as gender diverse in the last basically 10, 15 years. And they were an average age of 15 when they started to think of themselves as trans, but there was obviously a range in there. Many of them were youth or young adults. We also asked about what kind of transition-related medical or surgical interventions had they accessed. So I just wanted to note that not everyone in the sample had engaged in a medical transition. About 65% had accessed at least one medical intervention related to gender dysphoria. So very few had accessed puberty blockers. And that kind of, just to contextualize that kind of makes sense if you think about the age that people started thinking about themselves as trans. So many of them were post-puberty. Many of them did not think of themselves as trans or begin a transition before puberty. And then you see a large portion access testosterone. Again, thinking about the large proportion of assigned female at birth participants, that kind of helps to interpret the disproportionate access to testosterone here. 15% accessed estrogen, and then 20% had double mastectomy or chest masculinization surgery, and breast augmentation. And then you can see that very few, less than 5%, had accessed any sort of what we might call lower surgery or a genital surgery or gonadectomy. So we asked a few questions about decisional regret with regards to medical treatments that were accessed. So we're just going to show you one of them here. And so this was, if you would go back in time, would you still medically transition with these various interventions? You can see that of the interventions, puberty blockers and surgery are the ones that seem to have a bit greater in terms of decisional regret, with being above 50% around the kind of no or kind of ambivalence around being unsure. But still, you can see that a fairly substantial portion, though, still would go back. If they would go back in time, they would still access hormonal treatments. And so that's why it's very important to understand that detransition is not necessarily always connected to regret, though there is often a co-occurrence. So now moving into detransition related experiences. So again, thinking about, we're interested in when people started thinking of themselves as trans, kind of starting out that initial transition. We were also interested in when do people start detransitioning. And so you can see that we start to see kind of an increase from 2019, 2020, 2023 being the most frequently reported. That said, I want to just contextualize. We finished our data collection kind of midway point in 2024, so that may explain the kind of drop off there. But what's important to keep in mind is that many of the people who are participating in the study, the detransition experience is more fresh in their mind. So that can sometimes color the way that people kind of respond to, or may even speak to the need for kind of supports or having their voices heard. We were also interested in what kind of detransition related interventions might be desired by people who are experiencing decisional regret or going through detransition. And so this question was only available to people who had had a medical transition. That's why the N is of 620. So about 5% said they were interested in taking estrogen. And so those would have been people who were assigned female at birth. About 3% said they're interested in testosterone. Some people were interested, 4% in breast removal or gynecomastia surgery. So that would be to remove the breast tissue that was caused from estrogen treatment. Breast reconstruction, about 10% of the sample desired that. So that would be breast reconstruction following mastectomy. Vocal cord surgery, about 5% desired that, and that's to surgically intervene in the masculinization effect of testosterone caused by testosterone therapy in people who are assigned female at birth. Likewise, with an Adam's apple shave, that would be for assigned female detransition. And then some people desired facial surgeries. So now we also asked people, why did they feel the need or desire to stop or reverse their initial gender transition? This was kind of one of the big objectives of our study, to understand pathways to detransition. And so on our survey, we had a very long 21-item Likert scale that provided many different reasons that people could select the extent to which it applied or didn't apply to their detransition related decision making. So these dimensions related to external factors like discrimination, loss of access to healthcare, internal factors like identity change, mental health or psychological factors, and social factors. And we grouped them together to identify different detransition pathways. So again, we had 21 different reasons people could rank using a Likert scale, the severity of how much a reason applied to them, and then we grouped them together into financial barriers and care restrictions, discrimination and lack of support, or external pressures, discrimination, treatment dissatisfaction. TX is just short for treatment. So people are unsatisfied with the treatments that they receive and their effects. Shifting concept of gender, that's kind of like a change in people's identity or the way they conceptualize their sex, gender, or gender identity or expression, neurodiversity and mental health. Those were questions that were related to my mental health didn't improve through transition, my mental health got worse through transition, or I realized that gender dysphoria was related to something else. And then treatment satisfaction. So I stopped the treatment because I was very happy with where I was at. So from this, we applied what's called a latent class analysis to identify 4 different groups using these dimensions. So we have 4 different pathways to detransition. So this is our group A. They are the largest proportionally at about 1/3 of the sample. And they were more strongly endorsing neurodiversity and mental health related factors, shifting conceptualization of gender, and treatment dissatisfaction or complications. And so this is a more of your internally driven detransition. Group B is somewhat similar to A in the sense that it's also more internally driven. You can see more strongly on the shifting concept of gender, but they're more positive about the medical aspect of transition. So there's treatment satisfaction in this group, and you can see they're much lower on the other dimensions. So they're lower on neurodiversity, mental health, and treatment dissatisfaction or complications. And what I want to draw your attention to here is that in all of these groups, you can see that it's such a complex experience for everyone. So in any of these groups, it's not 0 on any of the factors. So you can see that there's multiple dimensions for detransition in each of these groups. Group C, which is 19%, is kind of our multi-dimensional group. They've strongly endorsed many factors, with the strongest factor being external. So discrimination, lack of support. You can also see that many of the other factors are also moderately high. So neurodiversity, mental health, shifting concept of gender, treatment dissatisfaction, treatment satisfaction. So it's kind of a very complex group. Group D is our second largest group proportionally at 28% of the sample. And they're much more externally driven. So discrimination, lack of support, you can see financial barriers and care restrictions being moderately high in this group, as well as treatment satisfaction. And this group is actually almost opposite to group A. And group A and D, you can almost see the polarity in the kind of discourses and ideas that are very prevalent in our society in these debates about gender affirming healthcare now. But what I want to make a point here is that these are all experiences that we see happening underneath the kind of detransition umbrella or retransition umbrella.
So looking at the latent classes and seeing which proportion of people make up each class, the majority of our participants for the data in general were AFAB or assigned female at birth, and AFAB people make up the majority of each of the latent classes. Like Kenan mentioned, Class A was our largest group who were often motivated to detransition based on intrinsic feelings. And the second largest group of people were Class D, which also makes up the largest proportion of AMAB people throughout the study or people assigned male at birth. And this class was often more motivated by external pressures and situations that caused them to detransition or retransition later. We also looked at the average age at which people access their first medical intervention. So you can see in the graph here that it's quite statistically different. There's a pretty significant difference in the earliest age at which medical intervention was sought amongst all the groups. So you can see the ages in the graph there. We also looked at the number of diagnosed and self-diagnosed mental health, MAD, and neurodivergent conditions that they had. And as you can see, there's quite a difference between both graphs. We can see here that Class A and C had disproportionate experiences of madness, neurodivergency, or mental health conditions that were formally diagnosed in comparison to the other two groups and to the self-diagnoses. And just as a reminder, again, here are the latent classes. I saw a question in the chat. So the determining factors are bolded here. Those are like the biggest aspects of each class. And we also looked at current gender identity. So sorry, this is the next slide there. I'm going a little too fast, but current gender identity for people that we interviewed. So as you can see, the majority of Class A folks no longer identify as trans or gender diverse, whereas Class D is quite the opposite, where a lot of them still identify as trans and gender diverse, just maybe in a different way, or maybe they detransitioned and then retransitioned. And then Class B and C are quite comparable in those numbers. But yeah, I'm going to pass it to Maddie again for the next.
So now we'll look at some recommendations for care providers working with 2SLGBTQ plus youth. In terms of mental health needs during initial transitions, many participants shared that they had mental health needs which were not met through their encounters with care systems, and that this intersected with later regret with permanent medical changes made to their body. And some also felt that these mental health needs were not related to gender. So participant 558 shared, I thought I was going to get therapy, but the clinician, was really just doing like assessments and questioning, so I didn't really have a good experience because I felt like what I needed was therapy, actual like help and support. I think what I needed was support, not support in my gender, but support in like trauma, body issues, getting sex education. I think I needed therapy. Some participants felt that their needs in regard to gender overshadowed their other needs. Participant 3 said of her experience with care systems, we'd gone into a lot of different issues I have with anxiety, and like I didn't have an autism diagnosis at the time, but there was definitely stuff with autism, body issues, eating disorder, like early childhood trauma. We talked a lot about those things. We talked about a lot of those things, and it seems like the moment I mentioned wanting to transition, it was like everything sort of got explained by my trans identity. In terms of transition-related decision-making, some participants shared that in hindsight, they would have made different decisions with regards to transition. Participant 8 shared her retrospective feelings, saying, I wish that I would have waited to physically transition. I wish I would have focused on social transition and seen how far that could have taken me. I had top surgery and mastectomy when I was still 16, the summer between 10th and 11th grade. I had never had any sexual experience before then. I had never dated anyone. I had never kissed anyone. So I wish I would have socially transitioned and had romantic and sexual experiences before physical transition. Some participants felt that detransition should not be viewed as going backwards or in opposition to transition. Participant 80 expressed a desire for care providers to view detransition as an experience of its own rather than as a simple reversal, saying, I want to say that the two most useful things I could have had in the past from care providers is, one, stop making assumptions about what I want or need based on how I identify or have identified in the past, and two, please just abandon the philosophy that detransition and transition are somehow two things at opposition with one another, because they're not.
So it's also really important to be aware of how culture and gender can intersect, and how cultural and spiritual practices can really shape the way that clients conceptualize their gender and their detransition. So some participants did discuss intersectional aspects of culture and identity that brought them to question Western mainstream binary ideas about transness. So participant 571 says being Indigenous has made everything not 100% gender binary make so much more sense, because I knew I never wanted to have like a womanly feminine body, but there was always a part of me that could never drop that very real, strong experience of having a woman's intuition. And I've never felt uncomfortable with that. I feel very much like I am not wholly a man, even though my preference is he, him pronouns. I present as a man, I just travel through life as a man. But I know internally there's so much more to it than that. So young people's ideas about gender have really changed over the past 10 years and differ considerably from older trans community. And medical and care systems haven't always kept up with these changes. many 2SLGBTQ plus youth do have very fluid and expansive identities, and sometimes that intersects with neurodiversity, culture, and other intersectional and identity-related factors. While older trans communities might have endorsed a more binary understanding of gender, this has really shifted in recent years, which means that the way that we provide care needs to shift as well. From our study and from others, it is clear that disproportionately assigned female at birth people are detransitioning, often co-occurring with identity changes, neurodiversity, and psychosocial challenges. Many of these people were youth when they began transitioning. And based on some of the trends and what we're seeing in the literature, we can expect the number of people detransitioning to continue to grow. Caring for 2S LGBTQ plus young people, we need to offer an affirming and adolescent developmental lens that also affirms the possibility for future identity shifts and exploration over time, and encourage discussion of future unknowns and alternative non-medical affirmation options, like social transition, changing name, changing pronouns, etc.
Okay, thanks so much, Maddie and Mac. Just a few strengths and limitations about the DARE study before we move in and talk about a resource that we have to share with all of you. So the DARE study, as mentioned, it's the largest study on detransition and retransition in Canada and the United States, done really in the last, in decades. So a strength of it is that it's a very large heterogeneous sample. By using community driven approaches and online approaches, we're actually also able to reach people who may have disengaged from the care system. So some people who detransition actually don't feel comfortable disclosing to their providers, or they just don't have a need to be engaging with, say, the gender care system anymore. They've kind of moved on from medical transition. So those folks get kind of lost in our, in medical research. So using this approach can actually can collect their experiences to better understand. But some limitations to highlight about the DARE study: it's a cross-sectional study, it's retrospective, means recall bias is an issue to think about. So people are recalling experiences that might have occurred decades in the past. It's also non-probability. It's a select sample of individuals of experience of discontinuation, detransition, identity fluidity. So it might not be representative of broader trans and gender diverse populations, particularly of older trans populations as well. I also want to note it's a large majority white, American living in the United States, and assigned female at birth. So those are other really important limitations to understand in terms of generalizability to broader gender diverse communities. We also had very few French or Spanish-speaking respondents, despite doing a lot of paid advertising with these sociolinguistic communities. Okay, so we're going to move on now and share a resource that we have that actually provides a little bit of guidance around supporting people who are thinking about or going through a detransition or retransition. And it's called detransinfo.com. It was developed from the results of two different research studies on detransition. One was the Detrans Canada that was done before the DARE study, and the other study is called the Detrans Discourses study, which was led by Professor Annie Paulin-Saint-Vincent and other colleagues.
So Detrans support is an affirming and data-driven resource that could help guide young people with regards to transition-related decision-making. It also has guidance for providers to talk with their patients about detransition and a worksheet on regret for individuals who feel regret. And to note, it's available in both French and English. And here is an example of the sort of information available on the website.
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your perspectives. This has been really fantastic. So like you were all saying, awareness and sensitivity to the stigma around detransition and the way that that might impact the behavior and values of other practitioners. So being really mindful of the safety of referrals that are being made, which can be supported through having connections within the community and between practitioners. And then being really mindful of how individual clients might conceptualize their identity shift. So whether that's through a lens of gender affirmation or whether they consider it a misdiagnosis or medical trauma and how they feel about bodily reconstruction. Detransition can be a destabilizing and major life change and a change in identity. So even beyond the scope of what's traditionally thought of as gender related. So kind of that ripple effect throughout social life and other connections. So being aware of those further impacts, engaging with trauma-informed practices and culturally responsive care. So again, being aware of the different facets of your client's identity and how that might interact with their detransition experience. And then also being aware of the availability of 2SLGBTQ+ affirming community supports and whether or not those are appropriate referrals or would feel safe or comfortable for them. And then, of course, leaving space for flexibility in terms of past, future, and present identity changes and validating how individual clients interpret their experiences and recognizing how that can be very different among clients, but then also the similarities.
And we just wanted to share a few support resources for you if you want to access them or for your clients. So we have something here from the Sherborne Health Center that has a support program. The 519 has a lot of drop-in counseling programs, and they have a 2SLGBTQ plus yoga program that happens there. There's also a few resources that came out of this study as well, such as the website here, detransinfo.com, the TikTok, which I believe is Kinnon's TikTok, but talks a lot about the work that he's doing around retransition or detransition, and then the Substack, which also includes a lot of different researchers that are working on this topic. And then on the next page, we also have like youth lines and call lines that people can access. So there's Trans Lifeline there, the LGBTQ Youth Line, and Interline that all do work with 2S LGBTQ youth and offer their services for them.
Thanks, Ari. Thanks so much, Mac, Maddie, some references. I also wanted to say a big thanks to all of you for all your participation, for taking the time to come out and learn. Also, you know, a shout out to Dr. Francois Sousset and also Gabriel and Shuga, who are folks who've been connected to some of this work. So Francois was a co-investigator with one of the projects that formed some of the data that built the DTrans support, and Gabriel and Shuga was a key research assistant on the last detransition retransition project, the Re-Detrans Canada project. So thanks so much to those folks, and yeah, to all of you and to all of the study participants and all of the co-investigators and team members of the project. So thanks so much, everyone, and feel free to send follow-up feedback or send me an email if you'd like to stay in touch.